and thank you for coming to the second event of our Women in Power to Empower series. It's my absolute delight to be here with Chief Constable Serena Kennedy of the Merseyside Police, who I will introduce in just a minute, but like I always do, I'd like to set the scene for this event because today we're talking about women in power. And the reason that we're talking about it now is because we have statistics being revealed by sources such as the United Nations, revealing that 28% of managerial positions are held by women. And that was in 2019, which was exactly the same statistic as in 1995. So nothing's changed. And we need to explore that. So that's what we will be doing as a part of this series. So to give everyone a breakdown, we will be splitting the conversation into two parts. The first part will be talking to Serena about her experiences that led her to the Chief Constable to where she is now as the first ever woman Chief Constable of Merseyside Police. And then the second part will be looking at the challenges that persist for women and how we can envision a different future. So just a few terms and conditions before we begin. I know that everybody will respect this, but could we please make sure that we keep our mics on mute, because we are, in the interest of time, not going to be taking any questions from the floor. So I really appreciate that. And second of all, so could you please stay to the end if you want to be in a photo, because that will be going up on our socials. I will notify you near to the time. I'll take off the screen recording for YouTube so that you'll just be in the photo for the socials. First of all, Chief Constable, please can you talk us through what was it that prompted your engagement in policing? Was it a particular experience or an innate sense of protecting the public that triggered your involvement?
Okay, that was a great statistic just before we start around the around females in executive positions, and 28%. I've used that myself on a speech. I was just trying to find it when I used it, because I showed a picture of myself and my grandchildren, my granddaughter at the time, and what I said was, it won't be even her children or her children's children who were in the boardroom. And that, to me, a scary statistic. It was when we were celebrating 100 years of women in policing, and the fact that we will need to carry on having an association for women in policing, because it is going to take that long for that glass ceiling to be smashed. So yeah, it was a great statistic. So going back to your question about what was it and why I wanted to be was it an innate sense of wanting to be a police? Well, I actually went to university. I was fascinated by crime. I read a lot of real crime novels. I studied at science A levels and went to university to study applied biology and genetics. I wanted to be a forensic scientist, but in my final year, I was doing my dissertation, and I was having to work in a hospital laboratory, and it was just me and a microscope, and I found it incredibly dull. And I'm an extrovert, and I get my energy from being around people, and I just thought, I cannot choose a career where a lot of the work is actually, laboratory work. So we often see forensic scientists on TV programs like Silent Witness, and it looks really exciting. And actually on Silent Witness, they do everything. They're the forensic scientists, and they're the investigators, and they seem to solve the crime, and the police has a very small role to play. Do a brilliant job, and we work really closely with them, but they kind of come to the scene, and then there is a lot of lab work to do, and I just decided at that point that wasn't for me. And also at that time, there was really limited opportunities in the science world if you didn't want to go on and do a master's and a PhD. And quite frankly, after 3 years at uni, I'd had enough of academia, and I wanted to I did want to kind of get into the working world. So I saw joining the police as a natural progression. I didn't want to stay in the world of. So I went on a course with Greater Manchester Police, which was open. Spent 3 days with Greater Manchester Police, and absolutely loved it. Loved being part of a team. I loved the variety of the work. I love the excitement, but also seeing the care and the compassion. Uh, seeing compassion and that real commitment to putting communities first, connecting with people, helping people, solving problems. So, you know, from there in my final year at university, I applied to join Greater Manchester Police. And you bit about that innate sense of about helping people and being a police officer, you know, that developed really early on in my service, that connection with our communities, that connection with people, that protecting the vulnerable and putting communities first. And you know, that is what I'm absolutely passionate about now. I'm just as passionate about it now as I was when I joined 28 years ago. It's what gets me out of bed every day. I always say to my staff, I have a very different role now in terms of my, you know, obviously my connection with the community in terms of that everyday contact is obviously, I don't have that, but I very much see my role as making sure that the officers and the staff that are part of Merseyside Police are absolutely all working together to put our communities first. But you know, I still love being a police officer. I've met with a colleague today who's just retired, who I've worked with a lot over the years, and we've talked about that, about still being really passionate about policing. And I say that policing in its totality. I don't just mean being a police officer, because it's broader than that for me. It is that we've got police staff, police officers doing the whole range of jobs. For me, it's an absolute privilege being in policing and being a police officer. We come across people in, you know, we often come across people in absolute crisis, and it might be the first time they've ever reached out to policing, and they may be at their lowest point in their lives, and we're often that first point of contact, and we're the person of calm, we're the person who can provide them with support, help, and enable them to deal with whatever they're dealing with or whatever they're facing. And you know, I've just met some brilliant people, both, you know, in our communities across where I've worked in Greater Manchester, Cheshire and Merseyside, and their journeys and their stories, that it's been a privilege to be part of them, you know, to be a moment with them for a moment in time. And I say often it's a moment in time for them at a point of crisis. And their experiences and their stories and their journeys have stayed with me and made me part of who I am as a leader within policing, but also, you know, as a police officer.
Another question that's been asked by a member of the audience is, what challenges have you faced, both personally and institutionally, on your promotion to the position of Chief Constable?
So I'll take it from a professional perspective first. You know, I think policing has faced one of its greatest challenging, you know, most challenging years, most challenging 21 months that it's ever faced in the time that I've been in the force, which is 28 years. And I've been Chief Constable for 9 months of that, and I suppose I'm talking about COVID. So policing through COVID, you know, obviously we deal with big events. We have done in the past, but COVID has touched every single member of our community. There's not a member of our community that's not been impacted by COVID, whether it be because we've all been, you know, dealing with lockdown, whether it be because of the impact it's had on employment, on our health, on our access to education, on our access to work, on our access to health. You know, everybody has been impacted by COVID. And I don't think there's anything else I can think of in my time that has touched everybody. So we've had big events, but they've touched a cross section of our community, and it's brought us into contact and conflict with members of our community who we've never been kind of into contact with before, potentially from a law enforcement perspective. And it has, you know, it has impacted on people's trust and confidence in policing, which has been challenging. It's also been really tough for our staff, because our frontline officers have had to come into work every day to make sure that we are continuing to deliver a great service to our community at a time when many of them have needed our support. And actually, that's been despite the fears of what they are taking back home to their families. So coming into contact with COVID positive people, or never knowing if someone's COVID positive and whether they're taking that back to their families. And that's still true today, you know, and policing wasn't prioritised for the vaccination. But what's been brilliant during that is, you know, the passion, the commitment, the resilience, the flexibility that's been demonstrated by the staff. So many organisations, you know, saw increases in sickness. In the first lockdown, first 2 lockdowns, we actually saw a decrease in sickness because people wanted to be there supporting our communities, because actually that's what all of us, you know, kind of joined policing to do, whether we are working as a mechanic, whether we are working on the front desk, whether we're a police officer or a PCSO. So really proud of the way that the workforce has mobilised during COVID, but it has been tough. You know, our Merseyside police have got things wrong. We've issued tickets, you know, in circumstances where we perhaps shouldn't have done, but we've held our hands up and said sorry. And the feedback from the community has been broadly positive. But, you know, we've had to deal with things like anti-vax protests, anti-lockdown protests, and absolutely everybody has a right to protest. But for the first time in my service, it became illegal to actually protest. So that was a real challenge for us, getting the balance right. But again, feedback from the communities broadly positive. The partnership working's been outstanding during COVID. And it's been, you know, I've been really proud to be a strategic leader across Merseyside and really pull together Merseyside in terms of our socio-economic position, in terms of where we are, in terms of levels of deprivation, access to education, access to employment, access to health. You will know, as young people interested in politics, where Merseyside sits. So we've had a lot of people who have needed access to additional support, and the way we've been able to mobilise across the partnership, as I say, has been first class, and I've been very proud for Merseyside Police to be a part of that. One of the things that I've been really proud to do as chief, in linked to COVID, is how do you say thank you to a whole organisation? Because everybody, it doesn't matter whether it's the cleaners who have been coming into work, keeping our buildings clean, making sure, trying to keep us safe in our work environments, or whether it's people trying to get us our IT teams trying to make sure that we've got the access to IT so that people can work from home and shield, because we've had, you know, obviously people that have needed to shield. Everyone, it's been a real one team effort. So we designed badges, and the children at St Vincent's School, which is a school for visually impaired young children, young people, designed our thank you badge. So it's been great to get out and about and meet the staff and actually give the badges, but, you know, delivered, made by our community, our children at St Vincent's. Obviously, the car explosion at outside the women's hospital was a real challenge, and, you know, I'd been chief constable then for about 8 months, 7-8 months, and it was, you know, just shocking to think that we'd had a terrorist incident here in Liverpool. There was that as a new chief constable and as a senior leader, and many of the strategic leaders, that what if it could have been so much worse, reflecting on what could have happened. It's the first incident of this nature outside a city that's not actually got a counter-terrorism unit. Our counter-terrorism unit for the Northwest is based in Manchester, but they mobilised very quickly. They service Merseyside. So again, a bit like COVID, I'm really proud of the response of the force, response of our partners to that, but also the response with our communities, and standing side by side together with partners and with community. It was a proud moment for me, and we anticipated a increase in hate crime. We always would after an incident of that nature. But what was really pleasing is we saw a small increase, but it wasn't the increase we expected. And I think that's because of the way in which the communities and certainly the different faith groups came together. And it's reflected really well on the city and the region nationally, the feedback in terms of the way Merseyside stood together. So whilst it was a really challenging incident for me as a relatively new chief constable, actually the outcome of it for our partners and our communities, I think, has been really positive. So I suppose they've been my big challenges, Livy, from a organisational perspective, institutional perspective, if that's what the person meant by the question. Personally, on a personal level, I suppose, nerves. Can I do this? Oh my goodness. Imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome, you will know, is more prevalent in females than it is in males, but I know I've got male leaders because we've done a podcast on it who also suffer with imposter syndrome. So kind of how on earth have I got to this? How on earth have I got here? And that was kind of raging loud when I first got into post. And also I've always had somebody above me to ask what shall I do in this situation, and all of a sudden there isn't a door to go and knock on because I'm suddenly the chief constable. So that's it can be quite a lonely place, but I've got a really good network of other chief cons who've been there and reached out and offered support. But also on an interview, I was really clear. I was really clear about the direction I wanted to take Merseyside Police in. I was very clear about what my priorities were for our communities and for the force. And that was building on what was already a really good force. Merseyside Police is one of the best performing metropolitan forces in the country, and I wanted to build on that really good work. So for me, it was about moving the organisation forward and enhancing what we were already doing. So I was really clear about my priorities around prevention, vulnerability, inclusion, community engagement, serious and organised crime, and well-being. And I kind of, when I went into the interview, whilst I was really nervous, it was, this is what you're getting. This is what I want to do do on behalf of the communities of Merseyside with the organisation. If you don't like, if that's not what the Police and Crime Commissioner and then the Police and Crime Panel, who had to kind of sanction Jane's appointment, if that's not what she wanted, then so be it. But I was very clear about where I was going, and I've got a really strong value set. I know areas of development, so kind of dealing with those nerves and that imposter syndrome and can I do this? That's kind of how I balanced it, to say, well, I really understand where I think Merseyside Police needs to go, and I've also got a really good team around me. I've got a good chief officer team, and that's really important, because I need good people. And the force is full of brilliant people, and it's about working with the whole force to make sure that we deliver a first-class service to our communities. You can't do it alone as a leader. It's about creating the right culture and great people. And for me, it's about making sure that our priority is delivering a first-class service to our communities. So I hope that answers the question. It's a very, very long answer to the question, but I have put some thought into it.
No, that's what we want to hear. So we are actually now at our second half of the event, where we will be discussing how we can empower women. And one of the things that we really want to know about is, why is there such a massive gap between men and women participating in leadership roles? So the question is, do you think that the lack of women leaders is due to the myths that hold back women at a workplace, so also known as like the gender-specific behaviours that are assumed of women?
So I think there's obviously, gosh, there's whole thesis been written on this and books, isn't there? But so where Merseyside Police is, We have really good representation at a senior level within the organisation for both police officers and police staff. So chief officers, chief superintendents and equivalents. So we do, and we kind of have a phrase, if you can see it, you can be it. And so we do have those inspirational role models at the top of the organisation, kind of what I would say are the executive, chief officer, executive, and a senior level. And those individuals spend, senior women spend lots of time coaching and mentoring to encourage people both into the specialisms where we need to see an increase in diversity around gender. I mean, we need to see an increase in diversity across all protected characteristics, but obviously we're focusing on women today, or to apply for leadership roles. What we do need to see at those senior roles is what I would say is there needs to be more intersectionality. So we need senior female leaders who have other protected characteristics as well. So we need to see, our Black women, our Asian women, our LGBT women, our women with disabilities at those senior roles. So again, there's that inspirational, if you see it, you can be it. As a force, we are 50-50 in terms of our gender split, but that's not true of police officers. So we are only about 40% female in terms of police officers at the rank of constable, and that's similar at a national position. Where policing needs to really work is around sergeants and inspectors. So we see a drop from about 40% down to about around 30% sergeants, and then down to about 20% at that rank of inspector. So that's our drop off. Now I think that is several. I think it's several things. I think one of them is around caring responsibilities. And often I've been asked, how have you got to be a senior leader in policing and be a mum? And I always kind of correct the conversation and say, no, the question is, how have I managed to get to there as well as being a parent? Because it's not the fact that I'm a mum, it's parent. And by focusing on me as the mother is the wrong conversation, because to me, it's how you balance that parenting relationship. And my husband is a retired police officer. How do we share the parenting responsibility? Accepting that's much more difficult if you're a single parent. But many of our females do want to be the primary carer. They want to work reduced hours. They don't want to work in leadership roles. That is absolutely fine. But we need to have the flexibility to enable people to work flexibly. At providing opportunity for flexible workers. I have to say, I think COVID has really helped with that. So I think it's been hugely positive in terms of busting some of those myths, because there is people within the organisation, nationally, within probably have been anti-flexible working in the past themselves, whether they're female or male. And all of a sudden, they themselves have had to be working flexibly because they've not got access to grandparents, they've not got access to school, they've not got nursery, because of short.
Sorry, I think you've broken up a little bit, sorry.
Yeah, am I back? Yeah, I'm back, Livy.
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay. I'll carry on if you can hear me,
you
and hopefully my video will kick back in. Right. So yeah, really seizing on those opportunities, but also, and the organisation for me needs to see flexible workers as an asset. In the past, you know, I do know that flexible workers, women, will have had conversations with line managers where they will be made to feel that they are. We need to see them as assets. The conversation needs to be, what can you do? How can you contribute? Instead of, what can't you do? And that's where we need to get much better. But we are a 24/7 service, and there's got to be flexibility on both parts. And you know, I have my daughters are 20 and 21, and you do have to have a plan B, C, and D around being a working carer. And the chances of having an 8-4 Monday to Friday job are zero. So as long as you understand that, if the issue about being a female leader is caring responsibility, you know, you've got to understand there's got to be flexibility. And you are gonna miss things. You cannot have your cake and eat it. You cannot take, if it's again children, you can't take them to school every day and pick them up and be in a specialist role in policing or be a leader in policing. But it is achievable. So I think that's a huge thing that stops women. So we'll have a group of women who don't want to progress and they want to be the primary carer, and they are performing a brilliant role. We'll have this group who are concerned about progressing because they do want to work flexibly, and the organisation needs to get better about encouraging and having opportunities. And then we've also got a group who feel really guilty about needing to pick up people from school or get to their parents if it's a different type of caring responsibilities. And those women need to stop feeling guilty. Some of that needs to be owned by the individual, because there's they shouldn't be feeling guilty, but they do. And I get lots of comments like that to say, I feel guilty if I've got to leave early. But their male colleagues don't feel guilty if they've got to leave early. And actually, the only people that can own that guilt is the individuals themselves. They've got to kind of understand that the organisation is more accepting of that.
Yes. So following on from that, what advice would you give to a young woman who is hoping to start a career where she aspires to reach the pinnacle of her chosen profession, specifically, maintaining that personal life, work-life balance, because that can be difficult, as you've said?
Yeah. I mean, my view in terms of focusing on policing, because that's been my career, it is the best job in the world. No day is ever the same. So even myself, who is not out there operational every day, and I have lots of meetings and lots of emails and lots of correspondence. No day is ever the same, and that is true no matter what your role is in with policing. No one day is ever the same, and that's just the brilliance of it. That the diversity of the richness of being in policing. And also, I talk to the new recruits when they join to say the jobs that are available to our new recruits now as officers, but also as police staff. Many of those jobs didn't even exist when I joined policing 28 years ago. So, as those new recruits get to my level of service with 28 years in, there will be jobs that they have access to that they haven't even thought about, because of the evolution of different types of crime and the way in which the access to the digital and the internet. We're having to evolve all the times in terms of new roles, and I don't think there's many professions where you can have such diversity in the roles in which you can have access to. So you might start off your career as a response officer, supporting our communities 24/7, through to being a PC on the dog unit, but then as a sergeant you go and do something completely different. And I think that's the brilliance about being policing. I also think I talk about it being I always say I've got public sector values at the very heart of me, in terms of that whole ethos about supporting communities, working with our partners, enabling our communities to help themselves, and I'm just absolutely passionate about that. And if that's kind of where you are, policing is a brilliant career for you. But your point around work-life balance is, it is really tough. It's a demanding job. You cannot be in policing as an officer or a member of staff just for the money and just because it's a job. For me, it's a vocation. You've got to be passionate about it because it gets into your every being, and it's a job that is demanding, challenging. There's a real human element to it, a real human aspect to it. It's one that you'll take home with you. There'll be jobs. There's jobs now that have stayed with me. I talked at the start that they have made me the officer I am today. And that's brilliant because that's why you enjoy it so much. But it also can be that can be tough. And I've already said it. You can't have it all. There will be sacrifices. You will miss out. If your friends are on Monday to Friday, weekend off jobs, you will miss nights out. You will miss events, baby showers, christenings, hen do's, stag do's. That is kind of life working as in the public sector on a shift pattern, whether it's policing or health or whatever. You've got to be very good at planning. So there's no need to miss those things if you plan ahead. You've got to be willing to be flexible and compromise. So to get the work-life balance, and then as you go, as being a senior leader, my family will say to me that my work-life balance probably isn't very good, and they're sick of me being on my laptop. So it is a compromise, and you're meant to be on your rest day today, or you're meant to be logging do some emails. But every rank I've been through in the past few years, and going to the National Strategic Assessment Centre to be a chief officer, it's been a family decision. So sat down with my husband and our 2 daughters, and it's been a family decision because we appreciate with every promotion means a little bit more of me and a little bit is away from home and more time committed to the organisation. So I think it's got to be, when you get into that situation where you have got a family, it's kind of got to be joint decisions, or that's the way we've always done it.
Mm-hmm.
Compromise and flexibility is the name of the game, I think.
Okay. So we're bringing the event to a close now. So I would like to ask you one final question, and that is, if the audience could take anything away from this meeting and this event, what would it be?
So I would ask you to think and remember that the vast majority of police officers and police staff are absolutely focused on doing the right things for communities. Our strategy in Merseyside is community first, and that is what most people get out of bed to do every day, irrespective of what your role is within the organisation. You may have heard the analogy around President John F. Kennedy going to see NASA and speaking to a cleaner and saying to the cleaner, "What is your role here?" And the cleaner said, "My role is to put the man on the moon." And what I try as Chief Constable is that no matter what your role is within the organisation, it's about putting our communities first. And that is, what the vast majority of us are here to do. We do make mistakes. And it's often with the best of intentions. And again, I say to my staff, if you make a mistake, but it's done with the best of intentions, then we will support you. But on the rare occasions, we do have people whose deliberate actions are not in line with the values of policing, and we have seen some of those nationally over the last 12 months and beyond. But obviously, there's been some really high-profile cases this year. So sometimes we do get officers whose actions are not in line with the values of policing, and at worst, their behaviour is criminal. But please be reassured that behaviour will not be tolerated, and they absolutely will be pursued through the police regulations, through the professional standards process, or the criminal justice process if that's appropriate. But go back, the majority of the organisation are absolutely focused on preventing crime occurring in the first place, protecting the most vulnerable in our communities, and also pursuing offenders that blight the lives of our community an impact on their quality of life. You know, I am really proud, as I've said several times, I'm really proud to be a police officer. I'm really proud of the service that Merseyside Police does for our communities, but I'm also really proud to be the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, which I think is the best police force in the country.
I agree. I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming on to this event, Serena. It really has been long, because you are such an inspirational woman, and to have you here and being a potential influence on the audience is just really, so thank you for taking the time to come to the event tonight.
No, it's my pleasure.
Also, and I also want to say thank you to the chair of Wirral Young Labour, Jimmy, for actually publicising this event so much, because it's been difficult trying to promote it as we're such a small group, and having, you know, people here is just great, and we're going to get it onto YouTube, so that's amazing. So please do check out our YouTube channel if you want to see the recording of this event. And before you go, if I can get a quick photo, I'll end the recording now. So if you want to be in the photo that's going to go on our socials, I'm going to take that now. Oh, I have to get close and personal here. Okay, so I will take the photo now. So if you want to put your cameras on, if you want to be in the photo,